Welcome to our explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating argument that completely reframes one of the most influential figures in all of history. But here's the twist. It's not about faith, and it's not about empire. It's about the very tools we use to think. Okay, so to really unpack this new idea, we've got to start somewhere familiar. Let's look at a really famous historical ranking, because it kind of sets the stage for a much, much bigger question. You might have heard of this book from 1978, The 100 by Michael H. Hart. In it, he ranks the Prophet Muhammad as number one. And his reasoning was pretty straightforward. He said, look, this guy was supremely successful on two fronts, the religious and the secular. Hart's point was that nobody else in history pulled off that combination quite like he did. But here's where the argument we're looking at today really throws a wrench in the works. It asks a pretty powerful question. What if the very things Hart used to measure influence, the number of followers, worldly success, what if those metrics are just obsolete now? In our world today, does that number one ranking even hold up anymore? And this really opens up a can of worms, doesn't it? It leads to this bigger idea, what if the way we even define greatness is changing right under our feet? If that's true, well, then we might have to completely rethink how we measure historical influence in the first place. Just think about the contrast for a second. On one side, you've got this traditional idea of influence, something built slowly over, 14 centuries. But on the other side, you've got people today, in science, in tech, whose work can impact billions of people almost overnight. The scale, the speed, it's just a whole different ballgame. So, this all leads to a really bold claim. The argument is that if we keep using these old yardsticks, followers, secular power, we're making a huge mistake. That the very foundation for that number one spot, it might just be totally flawed. Okay, so if the old reasons are out, what's the new argument, right? If it's not about the number of followers or his political achievements, then what is the basis for his historical importance according to this new thesis? Well, this is where the argument proposes a pretty radical shift in how we look at this. It says, stop thinking of him as just an influencer. Instead, think of him as a pivotal axis in human history, a turning point, the line that separates humanity before him from the humanity that came after him. And right here, this is the absolute core of the thesis. The claim isn't about how many people followed him. It's that he introduced a set of foundational principles that this argument says the entire modern world is now built on. So what were these foundational principles then? This is where the argument gets really radical. The idea is he didn't just bring a new religion to the world, he introduced an entirely new way of knowing. And this is such a crucial point. We're not just talking about theology here, we're talking about a new methodology, a new process for how any human being can figure out what's true. It doesn't matter what the subject is. And this brings us to a big picture concept, a field of philosophy called epistemology. It's basically the theory of knowledge itself. And the argument here is that he didn't just tweak it, he fundamentally reset the entire epistemological foundation for all of humanity. So what did that look like? Well, he essentially challenged everyone, from tribal chiefs to priests, just every single person, with one simple but absolutely revolutionary question. Where does your knowledge come from? On what basis do you believe what you believe? And this new way of knowing, it wasn't just some abstract philosophical idea. According to this argument, it was a real practical toolkit, a toolkit for critical thinking. So step one was to basically dismantle the old ways of knowing. I'm talking about challenging the entire system that was built on superstition, on mythology, on just tribal traditions and stories that were passed down for generations without a shred of proof. And in its place, a new, structured process for finding truth was introduced. It was all about rational inquiry, constantly asking, do you not reason? It was about demanding evidence for any claim, and, this is key, it involved rejecting any claim that couldn't produce evidence. That's a concept we now call falsifiability, and it's huge. And finally, it was all about promoting deep, reflective thinking. So, let's bring this all together. What's the ultimate takeaway from what's being called this massive intellectual revolution? More importantly, how does any of this connect to the world we're all living in right now? Well, this brings us to the final and frankly pretty stunning conclusion of this whole argument. The idea is that these principles we just talked about, rational inquiry, demanding evidence, the idea of falsifiability, that these aren't just interesting historical footnotes. They are the direct precursors to the modern scientific method. So if you look at it from this perspective, his main contribution wasn't just religious at all. It was, at its core, epistemological. By setting the rules for how we know what we know, he arguably laid the intellectual groundwork for basically every modern field of study we have today, everything from physics to history. And that leaves us with one last, pretty provocative thought to chew on. If this argument really holds water, it suggests something kind of profound, that the intellectual tools we use to explore the universe and the tools we might use to explore the divine might not be so different after all. What if they both spring from the very same historical root?